Hello. Are we live?
Yes.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. This is a meeting of the city's capital committee. Today is March 19th, 2024, and welcome. Today's meeting, if you recall, we had an initial meeting back in the beginning of February, or was it late January, I think, to go over an initial projection of what we had available for capital revenues and a capital budget for FY25. And just to refresh everyone's memory, we have the usual capital budget, which is comprised a lot of the half-cent sales tax and some sales taxes for parks and such, which are largely allocated by ordinance. And so those are fixed. But in addition to that, because of the last year's surplus, we had about $36 million, half of which of last year's surplus was $36 million. And we have that to allocate as well. And so that's what largely the amount that we're going to be talking about in terms of how we want to allocate that. Now, in the interim, as you may also recall, we had a series of meetings with the Citizens Advisory Committee. The Citizens Advisory Committee, as you know, are represented by members of citizens appointed by the members of the Board of E&A, as well as yourselves, the Board of Aldermen, to advise the Capital Committee on its selections or its priorities regarding capital improvements. And so at first, what I wanted to do is bring back up the capital improvement needs summary, and I will share screen. So this should look all familiar to you. Let me see if I can say that. There were a number of edits here. I know as a result of some of the input from the Citizens Advisory Committee and such, we did provide certain, like if there were grant funds, whether they had been received or not, whether certain items with streets, whether there was a pending grant or whether it was actually grant in hand. Obviously, those items where you have funds, matching funds from the feds, when it's a 4-to-1 match, those are the kind of things you want to prioritize because you get bigger bang for the buck. And there were some other clarifications on some of the projects, but mostly, and that there haven't been much in the ways of changes from what we discussed back in the end of January. But I just wanted to point those out as we went through the process. There was some clarification on some of the projects, so we wanted to include those. And so that's sort of the meat of what we wanted to look at. Carrie, you've got Alderwoman Spencer, you've got your hand raised, so go ahead.
Thanks, Paul. I just wondered if we were going to have, I know we went through this in some detail last meeting, but upon further review, I have some questions. I just wanted to know the most appropriate, best time to ask those about
when to ask. I tell you what, why don't we take them now? I did want to just let you know on today's agenda, I did want to go through the Citizen Advisory Survey, which I circulated as well.
So do you want to go through that first? I just
let's do that.
I don't want to bog down the meeting. I just want to let you know I had some questions about.
Yeah. My plan is to do this. Let's go through the survey first, and then we'll come back and I'll pull up what we have for the projected capital budget. But if you have questions about the inventory and those things, we can go through that then. Okay. All right. So without further delay, here we go. Let me pull up. I circulated this earlier. The Citizens Advisory Capital Committee survey. I did want to tell you, we met over a series of weeks in February. It was about a group of about 20, almost a couple dozen, 22, 23 members. And actually, judging from the give and take after each of the presentations, we had presentations from Parks and Streets and BPS on some of the key projects. And judging by the give and take, it was a pretty active group. I mean, they had some good questions and answers, or good questions, and we're pretty well engaged in those meetings. So we took, I thought they were productive. And you'll see some of the comments about trying to get more detail for projects, which is always a concern. And this kind of process is always, as you may know, that there's a lot of information to be covered over a short period of time. But one thing, but I would want to tell you about, and here's some of the survey responses by ward. We didn't have representatives from all the wards, but we did have a couple, 2 or 3, depending on where ENA's representatives were from a number of wards here. In terms of responses by critical project type, the highest rated projects were in the streets area, and you can see that a lot of them had to do with that includes the ADA improvements and such. Corrections of the public safety included also the PSAP, which has been a high priority item. Parks, recreation, and forestry, a couple of those items. Obviously, from the past, we've seen repeat of some of those projects. For instance, for rec centers, the pools and boiler replacements, as well as Soulard Market, which is also in that category. Fire department were some of the replacements in trucks, and then goes on to the other categories. There, we did not have much in bridges category this year, this go round, so that was on the lower end. I did want to highlight some of the more highly rated of the projects that we presented, and it's interesting that even when you don't have as much detail as you may like on a project, it seems that the sentiment overall still focuses on some common themes within what we get as responses to these surveys. One of the higher rated ones was the bus stop upgrades and ADA improvements, as that seemed to be a pretty good, much of a higher concern. This is not by state's bus stops. This is the infrastructure around the stops themselves. And that was one of the projects in our inventory, and it got one of the higher grades, as did the ADA transition plan implementation, which was a $2 million item in the inventory, in the streets category. Soulard Market also remained a pretty high priority. If you remember, we gave, and we'll get into this detail a little further, but we allocated $1.5 million to Soulard in the last go round. Fortunately or unfortunately, as you may see, one of the high priority items for that project was a boiler replacement, which is consuming most of that prior year appropriation. Cass Avenue Streetscape, phase 1, that's undergoing a $19 million project. That's one of the ones where we're going to get a match, and it's $3.8 million local funding out of a $19 million project. Similar to the traffic management enhancements, which I don't have the total dollar amount now. I just see that's missing, but it's $800,000 local match for that project. One of the more smaller items, medical examiner's building, it's $100,000. A surprising item on here is City Hall bathroom upgrades. I'll say that's something, I think something that's been on our radar screen for quite some time. I know there's been projects, and Rich can tell you about them, about what the progress in terms of the total building is, but this is to complete the remaining bathrooms in City Hall. That was actually one of our top 10. Medical examiner's building, again, another smaller item, but that seemed to be one that rose to the top. Traffic management enhancements, again, this is North Broadway, Cass to Riverview. It's a $7 million project with a $1.4 million local match. And then 4th Street cycle track and pedestrian improvements. That's $3.125 million project with $625,000 local match. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, the rec center pool renovations, $5 million. If you recall, over the last couple of years, originally that started at 7. We've allocated, I believe, $2 million in the last couple of rounds. So we're sort of peeling that away a bit and working on that. Same thing with the upgrades of the HVAC upgrades with rec centers, where it might be a big dollar amount, and we seem to will pull whatever we can afford in that particular go round and sort of reduce the obligations going forward. I do see something in the chat. Oh, okay. That's just getting. Nadric should have the ability to log in now. Just a note. So top 10 projects, and I guess this might be a combination of you didn't particularly like the category, or you didn't know enough about it. You can go down to the underground lighting vaults downtown. That's a pretty technical one that Rich can explain. Other city vehicles, O'Fallon Park, YMCA parking lot repairs. I think it's more, some of the more cosmetic looking type projects perhaps were less rated. Replace United Power Service for the building at LLPD headquarters, telecom system replacement, substations, electronic controls, sedans for the police department, revolving doors. And then, of course, this last one was the East St. Louis Bridge. That's $3 million. And Rich, I can refresh your memory if you need to, but I don't think that's one that's likely to get funded anyway. So those were the top, I identify the top 10 and the bottom 10 of all those projects. And it gives you a feel for where the sentiment was on those. Some of the ones needing more information. Arterial street paving. I noticed there was a common thing, and you'll see that in the comments that we got from a lot of the committee members, or at least a couple of the committee members, that it always helps to have as much detail as possible when you have a proposed capital project. And Rich and I were talking about this before, that the needs are so great. Often you are compelled to say, well, we need everything, so we don't spend too much time getting into the details of each one. But it does behoove the department to be as specific as possible when it comes to the project, because that allows people to visualize what it is that you're going to be doing, and then and identify a particular dollar amount. It's always helpful. And so I think that was a takeaway from some of the responses we got. Again, the substations, hydronic boiler, and South Patrol Division, and the headquarters, that was the United Power Service for the building itself. Those are kind of things where I need more information. That just showed up that way. Here are the pointers that participated, comments and suggestions. I think I'll let you can read through those a lot on your own. But I think some of the common comments is that the more detailed, the better. And I think because there is a lot to consume in this short period of time. And so, yeah, I think that some of the recommendations were that if we could identify those that are more nebulous, a little bit more detail, that can be justified as being critical or non-critical, that would be helpful. And so that was it. And then following all that, I've got the individual projects. If you're interested, you can go through those at your leisure. But it just gives those responses. And we had a couple dozen participants in the Citizens Advisory Committee, and we had 15 of those submitted their survey responses. So any question about any of these, the Citizens Advisory Committee, or any of the impact or anything related to their priorities, or questions about that committee? Okay, Alderwoman Spencer.
I just had a couple quick questions, Paul, not necessarily about the priorities, but on the side of the sort of summary, the bus stop upgrades, it says this is a $3 million project. And there's a $300,000 match.
Yes.
Where does the is this a federal program?
Yes, and so that's a great question. This is a partnership with Bi-State. They're splitting the match with us.
Okay.
And so it's federally funded 80-20. We're putting in 300,000. They're putting in 300,000.
Okay, thanks, Rich. Do we have the stops outlined for that?
So John Kohler had a presentation that is in the actual budgetary documents. I don't have that with me today, but I would say yes, they do.
Okay, I'd like that. One of the things I've been asked very recently by Bi-State and CMT is regarding the CMT selected bus stop on Gravois. CMT is investing about like $100,000 into a bus stop there. It would certainly make sense that we would be doing these investments a lot in tandem or in coordination with some of these other efforts.
Again, it's.
I'll follow up with that, Rich, but
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a partnership with Metro, so I would say that, yes, they are all coordinated with anything that is currently going on. They're involved right with us on this.
and I'll try to, I forget, those were included on the map itself, Rich?
I believe so.
Okay, yeah, and I'll dig up that exhibit and circulate it to the committee so everyone's got those presentations. So
What you might want to look for, Paul, is the PowerPoint presentation that John Kohler did on streets. It'll be one of those projects, and it would have been in week number 2, I believe.
okay, before the end of this meeting, I'll pull that up.
Thank you.
okay, great. Thanks so much. And my last question on that side was just like I know you mentioned, you were talking about the $1.2 million to Soulard Market, Paul.
Oh, sure.
And, we're all gonna wanna, you said most of it went to the boiler room, but
Right.
was there other projects associated with that? I didn't know if there was anything else associated. Maybe you.
Yeah, actually, you know what? Let me, first of all, are we okay to, let me pull down the survey question itself. So we're done with that. So let me see if I can pull up. I should have thought of bringing up all the exhibits we had, and I'll circulate these to the committee when I get there. But yeah, there was a list of projects for Soulard that was presented to the committee, the Citizens Advisory Committee, when Parks made their presentation. So let me get there. Just have to remember which meeting it was.
Try number 2 for that one, because I think Greg was second.
Okay, well, let's go. That wasn't that was the last one. Let me
I was just speaking of the funds that were already.
the 1.5.
Yes. Sorry, Paul.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if there were those other projects that are already funded were identified, but you can send that to me offline. I don't want to bog us down on that.
Well, here, no, let's, this was what was identified as Soulard capital needs for the new consideration. But in terms of the $1.5 million that we appropriated before, here, I can make it even larger. There was $1.5 million, and you know, this is one of those frustrating things where you say, okay, we really want to see some visual product or visual improvements over at Soulard, so we appropriated $1.5 million. And of course, and this is the challenge you always have with these capital projects, is that some of them are, as Rich could tell you, pipes in a wall that nobody sees but has to be done. And then some of you, hey, when can I see some real improvements? And unfortunately, yeah, it's sort of discouraging when you say, okay, here's $1.5 million for Soulard, and then I'm told, oh, well, the boiler, which nobody sees, and all of them is going to take up most of that. So, yeah, and so that's the situation we had, and the last $1.5 million. But this is the current list of projects for that project. Noel, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I want to go back to the survey if we
Sure.
could, but I can also wait until we conclude discussion on this item.
I'm good on this item for what it's worth.
Okay, well, let me see if I can get back to the survey.
Yeah, just 2 questions. The first is whether there were any priorities surfaced in the advisory committee process that were not in the capital needs inventory.
Let me see. When we asked for other projects, we got a couple of them. Let me see. There was I remember there's, that was like street. That's a Clark Street repavement from 7th to 20th. That was identified there as one person mentioned that. I recall. A lot of these comments here were about getting more detail on the ones that were submitted. For instance, the parks had a large dollar amount for projects, and they said they couldn't judge by that based on there wasn't enough detail. I didn't see anything specifically other than that for projects. There was this comment here at the end about the formation of a citywide transportation development district. Talking about that, that's a little bit beyond our scope. But yeah, I didn't see anything specifically about consideration of a large project that we didn't have.
Two items that I know come up often and have come up in other engagements are water department and investment into that infrastructure, as well as investments into modernizing city government, mainframe, et cetera. Was wondering if either of those came up.
Neither one of those came up, but I did mention at the very beginning that the capital committee itself and its charge is specifically airport and water don't come up before this committee. So and that's just the way the capital committee by ordinance was structured. It was to not include the enterprise funds. So that didn't, but yeah, I don't recall anything. Now, some of the items on the list regarding like, for instance, information systems and all pertaining to city government were actually on the inventory itself, but I didn't get anything over and above what was there.
Great. And then my other question, thank you. My other question is, I noticed in the comments a couple of respondents essentially questioning the usefulness of the process. Do you feel that these 13 responses are representative of the city, and what do you think we can do to get more engagement?
Yeah, I think there was one that I don't know necessarily whether they participated in that. I thought this one was particularly well thought out in that it had some detail about how to elicit more detail in terms of the projects themselves. And like I said earlier, it's always challenging. You know, we ask the departments, give us your requests for particular items and such. And they look at them, they look at their inventory, and they look at their infrastructure, and they look at their equipment, and the list is so long that, oh, well, you know, how much time do you put into an effort, do you put into a particular project? If one, the likelihood of it being funded is low, but two, it's just so large that how much detail is there? But I think just getting the feedback from this committee, it's apparent that the more specific you can be with a project and the more detail, even though there's a potential that you will not get funded at all, the more specific you can be, the better in terms of evaluation and people appreciating what that project will be, being able to judge what impact it's going to have and whether you can get funding for it. And I think that was a good takeaway. And I thought that was, and actually I can appreciate it too, because that's stuff I like to see on the operating side as much as on the capital side. So I thought that was an insightful comment.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. So going back to Alderwoman Schweitzer, you had your hand raised.
Hi. Can you did you have it totaled how much the top 10 projects would have cost?
Let me see here. I didn't do that, but we could take a look at it.
Oh, I don't know if it's not there, but I'm just interested in if that's like
2.3,
150 million or 30.
Yeah, no, it was 2.3. Well, some of these.
I think this front page is over budget.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to go. I don't think you're going to be able to go there based on just looking at it. Here you got 6.5 and all of that. Typically, what we would do is, as we've done in the past, would be, let's say, rec center pool renovations. That's obviously a high priority that we've seen in the Citizens Advisory Committee, although it's a big chunk of money too. And you've got, what, $36 million to deal with. So you want to be able to address some of it without potentially, you can do all of it. Same thing, Soulard Market, 6.5. Well,
Sure.
How much of it can you do? I think, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I add it all up here, but I think the sentiment is that, okay, these are the things that sort of popped up, and you want to be responsive to those things as much as you can. Now, you can't, obviously, knowing what we do, we can't afford all of it. And then I know there were some things on here that never get the popular vote, although, like I mentioned, it's a pipe in a wall that nobody wants to fund, but you have to. I feel about that sometimes when I hear that, but Rich can appreciate that too, is that it's something that you got to do. So,
Well, your breakdown earlier was really interesting about the top things people are interested in funding, especially around, the topics, with streets being kind of number one, and
right.
went from there. I thought, and then parks and being second, it's just interesting to think of it that way, as opposed to like individual project based, in terms of what people are interested in and on this committee are interested in seeing funded. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I totally hear the comment about the having more information for each of the requests. And I'm sure that knowing, that it's even knowing that the critical needs improve, those categories are helpful. But the point that they made about the $15 million across 10 parks all being critical is a really interesting one. Yeah, thank you for the time.
Sure. Okay.
I just had a quick
Oh, I'm
comment,
sorry. Go ahead.
but it's okay. I don't need the slide. You can go open up the next thing. I just hope we can, like, I know there was a mention about participation. I know we have struggled to get robust community engagement. I'm glad to hear that those that did participate were very engaged. And I know one of the key factors in getting continued engagement or improving engagement is that their engagement results in outcomes. So I hope we can, I don't think it's realistic to fund the top 10,
Right.
but I do think like I hope we can put funding towards the top priorities from the community advisory committee.
No, and I think it's had made a difference in the past, because we have tried to address those things which were sort of obvious. It's funny that, given, as we said, even if you don't have all the detail, even just as Alderwoman Schweitzer mentioned, the sentiment is there for a particular area to be addressed. And even if you don't have all complete information, that sentiment's still apparent when you get the responses, and so it's useful. It's useful.
And this will definitely not be the right time, but I just wanted to flag, or maybe it could be a different meeting. I did wonder how like other places do this, and I did get to talk to the city of Baltimore about their capital improvements prioritization process. So maybe I'll just forward the email I received,
Okay.
but wanted to flag that at some point.
Okay. Very good. All right. So we have the inventory and we have the Citizen Advisory Committee survey results. So I wanted to, again, pull back up what the particular budget outlook, the capital budget outlook for FY25 looked like. I've made a few adjustments here since the one we did in late January, because I did get another month of sales tax revenue. At the time, it was down through January. I got February in, and it's more, if that's good news, it's more flat than down. So that's good to know. But I've still got one more month to adjust. So while I've got some negative beginning balance because it's not quite up to where it would be. It's not as lower as it would have been in January. But and again, most of these items, most of the sources are allocated by ordinance to particular items in the capital budgets. That's where these are already, most of them are filled in already. But the big item, obviously, that we do not have allocated is this nearly $36 million in the prior year surplus. And I've got just a little over $36 million balance here. So that's where the big deliberations begin. How do we accommodate things from the inventory, both those which have been flagged as priority areas by the Citizens Advisory Committee, and other items that we would like to fund. And so that's our next project. I did want to, let me walk you through a little bit so you don't get, so you're just familiar, and for those who haven't been through here this process before. The exhibits here show the 5-year projections out for some of the basic, both the citywide and other half-cent and parks capital improvements projects. And most of it, what on the citywide, most of it's existing debt service. We do have some rolling stock leases that are slowly expiring, and as they expire, we've been using those one-time capital funds to pay for them. But I'm assuming that in the latter part of this, we're going to have to resume start doing lease purchase agreements. As most of this is so that's over $10 million of which is debt, and so that ties up a lot of our citywide. Although we do have an increasing amount associated, well, other city projects, most of which is in road and bridge projects simply because of the gas tax. Our gas tax revenues have been going up because the state increased its sales tax on gasoline. So we've been seeing those receipts go up. They should start to max out. We will be in year 4 coming up. And then we got one more year of increases, then it should plateau, because that's not an increasing source of revenue, but it just sort of flattens out. And so we should be seeing that over the next few years. BPS and street engineering costs. This is the amount that you are allowed to support our half-cent sales tax projects, and that's 1.3 million is taken out across all departments or all other allocations of the half-cent sales tax. Ward accounts. I should mention on the ward accounts, this is the new money that we're anticipating for next year. I still need to get a number from the comptroller's office about the old money. I know that there was the ordinance which reallocated or moved the old money into the new wards, but we haven't appropriated it yet. So I have to, I've got to get some numbers from the comptroller's office in terms of how much is out there that we, by ward, which will be different, that has not been appropriated. There's each of these major parks, and parks has its own exhibit. And again, these are allocated by ordinance, and you'll see some of the projects there. And police rec centers also gets 3% of the half-cent sales tax, and police gets 10% of the half-cent sales tax by ordinance. And the various exhibits that were attached, here's citywide capital. Again, this is the general citywide capital, separate from the half-cent sales tax. Again, and so it includes the big item here, the $35.8 million in it. And that's why you have a big amount here, over $36 million in a balance that we need to allocate. Everything else is balanced based on the sales tax receipts. Small deficit there because of it was trailing as of through February, but otherwise it's generated. It's structured to be balanced. Same. There's the engineering design exhibit. Ward improvements. That would be right now. This would again be the new money, $10.5 million. We do need to add any outstanding balances that have not been appropriated to the capital budget. So we'll get that, and that will be a different amount per ward based on what has been moved over to each ward from the old ward alignment. Let's see, major parks. Again, this is the major parks account of the half-cent sales tax. That's allocated by ordinance as well, and you can see all the breakdown there. And this is the metro parks, the 1/10 cent major parks account. This is the city receives 50% of that, with 50% of that going towards the metro parks district, and then the amounts are allocated by acreage according to the major the 6 major parks in the city. You'll notice that a chunk of these funds are allocated for particularly the major parks account on debt service for existing that bond issue we did for major parks improvements throughout the city. And then there are a couple accounts that both here, I think in the 1/10 as well as the 3/16 that are determined by the Parks Committee and the Board of Aldermen. They usually have hearings and allocate and recommend projects for that. So that's why you see these exhibits. It's appropriating the money, but the details are determined by those committees meetings. Here's the 3/16 cent. That would be the major parks account. Again, the same story, but a different source. They're allocated by ordinance, the major parks. And then the neighborhood parks, likewise, are determined by the Parks Committee. You have the rec center, again, that's the half cent, which they get its they have a 3% of the half cent sales tax goes to rec centers, and they're proposing some improvements to recreation center at Cherokee for shower improvements. And then the police department, again, by ordinance, gets 10% of the half cent sales tax. So those are the programmed amounts. So the question then becomes, how do we allocate the $36 million? And that's what we're going to have to be doing over the next couple of weeks to make sure that we can get that allocated. Are there any questions about any of that so far? Okay. What I was going to do, because I didn't have a particular scenario for you, but we're going to need to produce some scenarios for how we allocate the remaining 36 at least, and recognizing that we want to incorporate the priorities from the Citizens Advisory Committee, as well as identify, we know that we've got funds that for the projects that have been provided for by the feds, that where we got matching funds, and we want to maximize our dollars for that. And so as we know, that's a high priority. We also, public safety items were a high priority just from our normal course of business in the capital committee. So we need to go through a process of that to identify a scenario that balances the capital budget with this remaining funds. So what I don't know, Rich, did you have any thoughts how you wanted to pull together some scenarios for us so we can start deliberating on that?
So what I start thinking about, and what I generally do historically is look at, the needs by category, look at what the citizen advisory felt like were the top 10 categories, and then also look at big projects, like you said, where we have broken out some subset dollars to things like pools, rec centers, Soulard Market, other things that we could consider doing chunks to go to those pieces, so that, what I would hope to do here is take this $36 million or so and spread it across these categories in a number of ways, so that we, obviously every area gets some funding, but what we really do is concentrate, the priority funding on things like the federal grants, where, we put in 20 cents and 80 cents on a dollar is provided. I think that, and particularly, that's a no-brainer, because the Citizen Advisory Committee absolutely agreed to that. So I think some of the areas that I would ask that you think about just a little bit here are some of the areas that were not quite so high. And so even though they were not quite so high, I would ask that we still consider putting some funding towards some things. Fleet vehicles, it would be a tremendous problem if we didn't allocate any funding at all towards fleet vehicles. Things, the police department had some detectives vehicles that were on there for this year. The fire department had a few pieces of apparatus that were on there. And then, of course, some of these things in parks that we all know that have to happen, such as the hazardous tree, ash tree removal programs, and things like that. So what I would like to do is to be able to assemble an idea of this, and then float it to the committee and take feedback from anybody on what I'm proposing. And of course, we normally vet that through pretty quickly, and again, $36 million for $150+ million in critical needs is not a lot to go around, but if we have the opportunity to put a little bit in many different areas, it helps. So that's kind of the approach I've always taken.
Well, let me ask you this, I'm looking at the calendar. When do you think you might, if you had just getting some input, have a scenario that we could look at and discuss about and we lost you on mute.
I've been thinking about this for some amount of time. When do you want to have the next meeting, Paul?
Well, I'm thinking we either have one potentially either later this week or early next week. And then we could have, I mean, I was thinking maybe, let me see, we're running out of March pretty quick. Maybe we should shoot for 2 meetings. Maybe we shoot for 2 meetings next week. Is that something people could do? I mean, I'll open it up to the committee.
It's
I
the
think-
last week of committee hearings at the board. Before it'll be tough to vote bills out of committee and have them heard before the end of session. So it's probably one of the busiest weeks at the Board of Aldermen.
Oh, next week is?
Yeah, it's like the last week where there's going to, if it gets out of committee next week, it doesn't need to move ahead on any other agenda.
Okay,
At the full board.
okay.
So it's kind of like the last really good week for board committee hearings. So the week after next might be better for if you're going to have more than one meeting.
Okay, well, the week after next is the week of the first. That's where we start getting tight. Because if we do you think we could do, let me see, today's Tuesday. Could we do a meeting? Well, heck, could we do a meeting? I mean, do you think you'd have something later part of this week, Rich?
I would think Friday, I could have something probably as a rough
Friday's a good
start,
day.
yes.
Does that, I mean, it could be after your board meeting. Does that
We
sound
don't-
like
We don't have a meeting this Friday.
oh, you don't? Okay.
So it's a really good day.
Oh, great.
It's actually, it's not a great day for me because we're on supposed to be on spring break. And so I had identified that day, those 2 days as off days for me, but could certainly.
Are we going to have a budget hearing on Wednesday, the 27th, Alderman Spencer? Because if we
Yes.
don't, we are
Yeah, there's 3 bills in that committee,
okay
but yeah.
at 9.
Well, we
Okay.
moved the meeting to 10 because we were unable to get quorum, generally speaking, at 9.
I was always there.
You what? You were always there and I appreciate it.
But
Okay.
what I was looking for is I was looking for at least 2 more meetings. Because that way we could get a scenario, we could start fleshing some stuff out, have some questions, and then at that meeting, and then come back for some sort of recommendations following that to give people enough time to think about it and get back. And so
Just to level set timing, Paul, I assume the intent here is to have the final recommendation ready for this all to go through the budget process and be
yes,
presented.
that's right.
The level set for some of the committee members as sometimes this committee produces recommendations that go into board bills, but here we're looking at the budget process.
Right, that's right. That's right. Thank you.
Sorry, Paul, just for clarification, would the next so Rich, you're planning on providing a set of recommendations to the capital committee in something that you can provide by Friday, and then us
Right.
deliberating over it over maybe 2 meetings.
Right.
Yes,
As part of that, so I'm mentioning this because I don't know if this is going to fit within that timing, and this may influence the decision on when we have these hearings, but like, to me, this should be happening in concert with taking a look at the ARPA funds and which of these can be used for leftover ARPA funds as we're coming on, potentially having to reallocate a bunch of ARPA funds. Those fleet purchases seem like easy easy things that could come out of, unspent ARPA dollars, as opposed to trying to program them into repaving of streets or things that take a longer time to do. And some of these things like the refuse fleet, identified needs, certainly our public health concerns, et cetera. So I know, but I just was hoping we could kind of have these conversations in concert with, I know some of those ARPA funds are having trouble getting programmed or
Well,
getting spent.
yeah, and I think that's something to keep in the back of your mind, although I don't think you're going to have that answer in this time frame that we are working on that we have to do the budget. So I don't think there's going to be anything that, for instance, and I think that rolling stock is a good example, because that's something that should, in the end, you have ARPA funds that can't be spent. You've got a big long list of rolling stock you could certainly buy if you have to. And just knowing how much we have available, that list will not be extinguished by the time, even if we throw $5 million at the rolling stock issue, you're going to have still a long list to deal with later in the fiscal year if we need to. But that's sort of what I was thinking. But Nancy, I see you have your hand raised.
Yes, I do. I think that there is some monies that we have available now to spend, and then it's unclear that we will be coming back for a third wrap up of what hasn't been spent, but we did look at some of the capital issues here to see what could be paid for by ARPA. So I have some changes to some things, but not a lot, that we were thinking about that could come out of ARPA money and be spent right now, but they don't add up to a lot of money. Like, it's probably less than $400,000 at this point. So there is some things that we're looking at, but and that will be part of committee meetings next week also. So and Kara, Alderman Spencer, I can call you afterwards on that, but there isn't as much money in the pot to spend as people had anticipated, thinking there would be. So
you mean out of ARPA, Nancy?
The leftover ARPA money right now that is not going to be, that we know is either they did a project and they didn't need as much money as they thought, or the project has now the money's been encumbered and will not be left over. But overall, there's not as much unspent money or unencumbered money as we initially anticipated.
Maybe Noel could speak on that, because I'm hearing from some of this. I'm hearing that CDA is having trouble getting the funds allocated to them.
I'm happy to speak on that. And
I'm kind of surprised to hear that, but I'd love to hear what CDA has to say on that matter.
Yeah, I'm also surprised to hear that and concur fully with Nancy. We've executed a number of contracts and expect to have the funds fully obligated by the end of this year and spent by 2026. If anyone has heard otherwise or suggesting otherwise, happy to connect with you or them to address their concerns.
We should do that, because some of your
So what I would say is that
yes.
people are talking.
I'll share with you some communication I've gotten from some folks in your office about
and
it.
I'm just going to say for the record that that's a little bit problematic, because the people that know the most about this work are the appointing authorities and their conversations with the administration as to where they're spending, how they're spending, and where that's going to go, so that we then have a presentation to the Board of Aldermen. I think it's fine if people want to talk to people, but not everybody has all of the information that they may need to be making comments that are not consistent on where we know the money is being spent, et cetera, depending on what department or sub-department of CDA, streets, or BPS, or 3 and DHS, for example, that people are working in. It doesn't mean that they have the full picture of what's being spent. So I'm sorry, Noel, you can add to that if you want.
No, it broke up a little bit, but would be happy to connect and discuss any concerns that you may have.
This was brought to my attention by one of your staff members, so I don't know what to, I won't belabor the point, but maybe, I guess what I'll also, if that's not maybe the case, but maybe as well, in addition to looking at ARPA, and it sounds like maybe there's not a lot of unspent potential there, based on what Nancy and Noel are saying. It might be helpful as well, like if we're looking at some of these, some of these have been identified as having matching funds and grant applications. So kind of knowing the status of those, I mean, would be really helpful, especially, you know, and I did have some questions about some of the specific amounts listed in here, Paul. I don't know when you want to kind of.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, in one of the things we did, and this is through the process of Citizen Advisory Committee, is that we added some commentary on which projects had been identified with where the grant has actually been received and which ones had actually been applied for. Rich had some of the detail. Rich, we lose Rich?
Yeah, I think
Oh, there you go.
it's
Okay.
pretty well listed on there, what has been applied for already, which
Mhm.
grants we already have accepted, but we can, I mean, we can certainly,
Yeah, no, I guess I didn't know how up to date that was. So like, for example, yeah, I mean, just the applied for grant ones, you know, like the River to Pear.
Right.
You
we
know,
do
it's
not
like,
have a grant for it yet. It's
Okay.
applied for. So if the only two that I can tell you, I believe that, and let me look at my list here real quick.
the Hodemont looks like it
The
was
ones
received.
that we have grants for, we received a TAP grant on 4th and Washington, which is the multimodal improvements. We
Okay,
received a CMAQ grant for traffic management enhancements phase 6, Dr. MLK Hodemont DeGrand. We've received a TAP grant for ADA bus stop improvements grant, Dr. MLK Cass and Delmar. And at the moment, those are all the grants that we have received. The others that say applied for, they're in the hopper, but we don't have an answer on them yet.
Yeah, I think obviously those which we were getting the 4-to-1 match are just by basic on our criteria are pretty highly rated simply because you're getting a 4-to-1 match. So those are the ones that you really want to
And I
grab.
will show those in my scenario that I give. I think that's a very good point, though. I will show those on there if we
Right.
received a grant, so then you know that we need the funding for it.
Right. Okay. Okay, well,
Rich,
that brings us back to in term of how do we want to proceed with meetings and such. I'm really thinking we need to have 2 more meetings at least. So if we get a recommended scenario or at least a couple of scenarios from Rich by the end of the week, you don't believe?
Well, I would like to just give you a scenario of how it goes, and it'll probably be broken out in funding. And then, you know, what I would just ask for is your comments on it.
Right.
As far
Okay.
as, do you want more money to go in one bucket than another? Is there a project I didn't include that, you know, you feel like should be on there? I think that's the easiest way to go.
Okay. So looking at availability, I don't want to go too far into that first week of April because that's getting us backed up in terms of when we need to get this the budget done in time, because I've also got an operating budget I'm working on, by the way.
Oh, Paul, if the Board of Alder people are saying that they're available on Friday and Rich gets us the information on Thursday, does that let you have a meeting on Friday of this week?
I could, although
no, I'm sorry, Alderman
Spencer
Spencer has a problem.
go
Is
ahead.
not
I mean,
available.
I don't want to hold up the committee, but yeah, I mean,
Are you meeting tomorrow with your budget committee? Wednesday? No?
Well, yeah, well, we can't do a meeting. Well, we don't have Rich's
Well,
stuff.
we can possibly move quicker on getting the information if people have even if you had availability. I'm trying to balance you all being able to look at information that you might not have seen a lot, and then trying to get one meeting in this week.
That's what my goal was.
Right.
Although you need to have a notification.
Oh, right, we have to
Wednesday would not be
post it.
possible.
Right.
So-
If Friday is just the presentation of the first draft, that might be actually a good one to know that not everyone's going to be able to be there for if there's time to, watch the hearing and provide feedback. I think that'd be more problematic for people not to be there when we might be taking a vote.
Yeah, that's a good point too. So is that okay? Alderwoman Spencer, you're all right with that? We could circulate the materials in advance of that meeting, have the meeting, and then we schedule something.
The first
Maybe-
week of April.
First or second. It's got to be the earlier part of that week, I'm thinking.
Second's better for me.
What's that?
The second's better for me.
Okay. Well, let's if that makes sense.
But we're not going to meet at all next week?
Excuse me?
So the idea would be to not meet at all next week?
No. We would have, because I'm told you guys are saying that was a bad week.
It's just the last week before it's the last week of committee meetings. So we're having committee meetings and new bills added to the committees, and I don't know what day is safe right now.
I'll take however you guys want to do it, but I didn't want to go past, let's say, the second and getting that final one out.
Would the Friday afternoon work, or do you think you'll be in Alderman meeting all day?
I think it's gonna be a long one.
I think like we could probably shoot for like Tuesday afternoon. We have a transportation meeting in the morning, but I don't know that we have any standing committees on Tuesday afternoons.
I have a 1 p.m., a 3 p.m., and a 5 p.m. on Tuesday afternoon. It's hard for
What
me
else
to
you got
schedule
going?
1 week in advance, to be honest with you. I tend to book out like 2 or 3 or 4 weeks in advance a lot of
Yeah.
times. I'm sure we all do.
What does Wednesday look like, the 27th or the 28th? Oh, the 28th we have 26th is the HUD's meeting. Is 28th, is there a public safety meeting on one of those days?
I would be sure there is a public safety meeting.
It's
on that.
scheduled, yeah,
On Thursday, Christina?
yeah, at 2
Okay.
p.m.
Okay,
And there's usually Health and Human Services at 9.
Yeah, that's not on the calendar yet, though.
yeah, but we have a meeting with all the
Ideally, it would be the
utilities.
second. The second would be great in terms of not trying to. It's just so likely that there's going to be meetings added that week.
Yeah,
We'll
I-
have to come back and reschedule.
I think the second makes sense, and if people, we're getting the draft on Thursday or Friday. If you have issues with it, like can we email the group?
Okay.
Can you do that meeting Tuesday morning, the morning of that day?
The second?
On the second of like 9 o'clock?
Yep.
Anytime before 11, because we have HUDs at 11 usually.
Okay. All right. Well, then let's do that. We'll get something together, get it circulated. We'll get a meeting scheduled for Friday. Then you'll have all week to consider what's presented, and then we'll have another meeting on the 2nd to make some recommendations. Does that sound like a plan?
Yep.
Yep, and then if people, I would say also, Rich, I'm gonna volunteer you that, Colin told you that if people had questions after they see the reports, like if Alderman Spencer isn't at the Friday meeting, listens, but has other questions, that they would I would assume people would reach out to try to get answers for some of their questions before Tuesday's meeting.
Yeah, I would request, send them to me, and you can copy Rich, and we'll deal with them.
Sounds good to me. That's fine.
All right. Okay, very good. And we'll have to go about getting a meeting set up for Friday. Well, that's all we had today. Anything else for the good of the group here?
There was a thing I flagged earlier. I'll forward kind of like a little presentation from, well, this is for like not putting into implementation anytime soon, but just I was talking to the city of Baltimore about I was vetting them, or they were a reference for a sustainability plan. And what was very interesting is that they have an equity-based prioritization scheme and scoring for capital projects. And I was like, what does that look like? And that's managed by their DPW, their Department of Public Works. So I just thought it was very interesting, and it gives a little more like data points for helping prioritize lots of projects based on like environmental impact, social impacts. So, and but it's written for like DPW people, so it's not like all foo-foo, you know? So I thought it was interesting. I'll forward that along. And I know I saw we got a Bloomberg Mayor's office, Bloomberg team coming in for climate change. It might be an interesting. Anyways, I thought there was like a realm of possibility. It could be something we might do in the future, especially if we had ever beefed up the budget department.
We'll have to have that conversation. Okay. Well, very good. And well, that's all we had. So let me, heck, I need to pull that up. Well, thank you all. And we'll be seeing most of you on Friday. And what time did we say? Did we say a time?
We didn't say.
Well, we'll look to get a time. So just keep your eyes out for an invitation for a Friday meeting. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.